This is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and military operations depicted are entirely fictional. The dog broke left off the trail at 0547. Colton Draper saw it happen. 1 second, Echo was 3 yards ahead, nose level, ears working the morning air. The next second, the dog stopped dead, his whole body locked. Not a growl, not a whine, just the full stillness that came when something invisible to humans crossed his scent line. Echo, heel! The dog did not heel. He dropped his nose, sampled twice, and pushed through the pinion brush without looking back. Colton stood on the trail with his water bottle in one hand and the dawn spreading pale gold across the mesa. He listened. Branches cracked where Echo had gone through. Then silence. Then movement again, farther down slope. He capped the bottle and followed. They ran this trail every morning. East rim of the mesa above Corvo, New Mexico, 7,000 feet. Dry air that tasted like dust and juniper resin. The trail was packed hard from their daily passes. Colton's boot prints and Echo's paw prints layered over each other until the dirt held a record of every morning for 3 years. On clear days, you could see 50 miles south to the flats, where the land went pale and flat and eventually became someone else's problem. On bad days, the wind came off the Sangre de Cristos hard enough to make the whole ridge feel like it wanted you gone. This was a clear day. The sky was enormous. The mesa dropped away on both sides into canyons so deep the shadows at the bottom had not yet learned the sun was up. Colton ran with the easy pace of a man whose body had been trained to cover ground efficiently and whose mind no longer asked why. The run was the first discipline of the day. After the run came the radio check. After the radio check came the coffee. After the coffee came the silence, which lasted until someone needed help or until the day ended, whichever came first. Most days, nobody needed help. Most days, the silence won. This was not going to be one of those days. That made what happened next harder to dismiss. Echo came back up through the brush, 40 yards below the trail. He was carrying something. He climbed to the packed dirt, sat directly in front of Colton, and dropped it at his boots. A strip of cloth, dark cotton, maybe torn from a shirt. One edge stiff with something brown and dried. Colton crouched and turned it over in his fingers. Blood. Not animal. The stain pattern was wrong for game. Thin. Smeared in one direction. Human. A strand of hair clung to the weave. Long. Light brown. He looked at Echo. The dog was already staring east, down the slope toward the arroyo that cut through the canyon floor below. Show me. Echo moved. Not his easy morning trot. Tracking gait. Nose low, working side to side in short arcs, tail level behind him. He went down through the scree and dry scrub, paused once to lift his head and sample the air, then pushed on with the certainty of a dog who had caught what he was looking for and was now simply walking the line to its source. Colton followed. He read the ground as he went. Boot prints in the soft dirt. Small, uneven stride, the left foot dragging. broken branches at hip height. A smear of blood on a flat rock, this one still dark red, fresh enough to be hours old, not days. Someone had come through here. Hurt, moving slow, heading down toward the arroyo. The arroyo ran dry this time of year, a 10-foot cut in the earth with sand and gravel at the bottom, shaded by the canyon wall on the west side. Good cover if you needed to stop. Bad place to stay if you were bleeding and alone. Echo reached the rim and stopped. He looked down into the cut, then turned back to Colton. One ear up, one ear folded, waiting. At the bottom of the arroyo, half in the shade of the west wall, a shape lay curled against the bank. Small, human, not moving. Echo, heel. This time the dog obeyed. He sat at the rim with his chest forward and his eyes locked on the shape below while Colton slid down the sandy bank. 2 days earlier, the mesa had been quiet. Colton woke at 5:20. No alarm. The body had kept its own clock for 21 years now and showed no sign of stopping. He swung his legs off the cot, set his feet on the cold trailer floor, and sat still for 10 seconds while his right shoulder delivered its morning report. Stiff. Grinding. The price of a fast rope descent that went wrong on his 5th deployment. A torn labrum that healed poorly and ached when the weather changed, or when he slept on it wrong, or when it simply felt like reminding him that the body keeps its own accounts. The trailer was a 1987 Airstream parked on a cleared pad near the top of the Mesa Road. One room, propane stove, a table he had built from scrap pine because the original table had dry rot. Medical supplies in a steel footlocker under the window, more organized than anything else he owned. Rope and rigging gear hung on hooks by the door. A SAR radio sat on the counter, its red standby light steady in the dark. He checked the radio first. Channel 7 for County Search and Rescue. Channel 12 for Mutual Aid. Both quiet. Then, coffee. Black. The mug had a chip on the rim he noticed every morning and never fixed. Echo lay on the floor beside the door, chin on his paws, eyes open. 5 years old, 82 pounds. Black and tan German Shepherd, with one ear that stood straight and one that folded forward at the tip, giving him a permanent expression of skeptical patience. He had been trained by a man named Danny Lusk. Danny had been 24 years old and 11 months into his first deployment when he died on a hillside in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, 30 seconds before the extraction helicopter could get him off the ground. Colton did not think about Danny every morning. Some mornings he reached the trail before the thought found him. This was not one of those mornings. The maroon beret hung on a nail by the door. He had not worn it in 3 years. He had not taken it down either. 18 years in the Air Force, PJ Pipeline, Indoc at Lackland, where 80% of his class washed out in the first 3 weeks, and the ones who stayed learned that controlled drowning was a job skill. Combat dive, freefall, SEER, paramedic certification. Then the deployments. Helmand, Kunar, Anbar, Horn of Africa. 7 rotations over 14 years. The motto was, "That others may live." The math behind the motto was simpler. You got there in time, or you didn't. After the shoulder, 2 years at the AFSOC Ops Desk. Deployment authorizations, medical waivers, casualty notification coordination, transfer forms. He had processed 1,000 documents that looked correct on first glance, and learned to spot the ones that weren't. Bureaucracy had its own grammar. Lies always conjugated wrong. He hated the desk, but it taught him things he could not have learned in the field, and those things stayed. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the rack. Come on, Echo. Trail. The dog rose without hurry and followed him into the early light. 2 days later, a dog brought him something he could not ignore. The girl was alive. Colton knew before he touched her, because her fingers were wrapped around a fistful of sand, gripping it with the blind determination of someone trying to hold on to consciousness by holding on to anything. He knelt beside her and placed 2 fingers against her throat. Pulse fast, weak, skin hot and papery. Can you hear me? Her eyes opened, brown, unfocused. She flinched and tried to push herself away, but her arms buckled. She had nothing left. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Colton. I'm search and rescue. Her lips moved. No sound. He uncapped the water bottle and brought it to her mouth. She drank in quick, desperate pulls. Slow down. Small sips. Your stomach will fight back if you rush it. She slowed. He saw what it cost her. He assessed while she drank. Dehydrated. Minimum 48 hours without adequate water. Capillary refill sluggish when he pressed her thumbnail and released. Lips split and peeling. Breathing shallow but rhythmic. Left ankle swollen nearly double. Poorly wrapped in a strip of fabric that matched the cloth Echo had brought him. Both palms scraped raw and crusted with grit. Both knees skinned through torn pants. And on her wrists, just above the hands, a pair of marks that had nothing to do with hiking or falling. Rope burns. Symmetrical. The skin rubbed to a raw pink where something had been cinched and held. He studied those marks for 3 seconds. Then he looked at her face. She was young, 19 or 20, thin, hollowed out around the eyes and cheekbones, hair matted with dust and dried sweat. She had the look of someone who had been running, not toward something, but away from it, and had finally run out of ground. What's your name? She shook her head. I need to splint that ankle. It's going to hurt. She nodded once. He opened the field kit from his pack. SAM splint, rolled gauze, medical tape, ibuprofen. He molded the aluminum splint along the lateral side of her ankle, positioned it against the swelling, and wrapped the gauze in firm, overlapping turns. She did not cry out. Her whole body went rigid, and her breathing came fast through clenched teeth. But she held. He taped it, checked the pulse at the top of her foot, pressed the nail of her big toe for color return. Circulation intact. Done. You're tough. 18 years of field medicine, forward operating bases with no electricity. Hillsides under fire where the dust got into everything, and the only clean surface was the inside of a glove wrapper. The rear of a helicopter, with the rotors shaking your hands and the wounded underneath you, screaming or not screaming, which was worse. An arroyo in New Mexico with a September breeze and a quiet girl should have been the easiest triage of his life. It did not feel easy. Above them, at the rim of the arroyo, Echo had not moved. He sat with his ears canted forward, scanning the slope behind them. Sentry posture. After a long moment, he stood, picked his way down the bank carefully, walked past Colton without acknowledgement, and lay down beside the girl. Not beside Colton, beside her. "That's Echo." No response, but her hand slid from the sand to the dog's shoulder and rested there. Her fingers curled into the thick fur at the base of his neck. "He's not usually that quick with strangers." "Nothing. I'm going to carry you to my truck, half a mile uphill. I need you to hold on and not move that ankle. Can you do that?" She looked at Echo, then at Colton. Something behind her eyes was calculating. Not trust, not yet. A survival equation. Was this man safer than whatever she had left behind? "Don't call anyone. Please. They'll send me back." He did not ask who they were. Not yet. He picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. Her head fell against his shoulder and stayed there. Not trust, exhaustion, the body giving up its arguments. Echo rose and walked ahead of them up the bank and onto the trail, checking behind every 10 paces. Colton climbed with the girl in his arms and the pack on his back, and the shoulder grinding in its socket with every step. The grade was steep. Loose shale shifted under his boots. He adjusted her weight, kept his center low, and climbed the way he had climbed out of 100 bad positions. One foot, then the other, breathing controlled. The sun was up now, and the mesa burned red gold under a sky so blue it looked painted. Down in the valley, a hawk cut slow circles over the scrub. The girl's breathing slowed against his chest, asleep or close to it. She smelled like dust and dried sweat and 3 days of desert without shelter. At the truck, he laid her in the back seat and propped the splinted ankle on his pack. Echo jumped in the front and sat upright, scanning through the windshield as Colton drove the 1/4 mile back to the trailer. The road was rough, and the truck jolted over every rut. The girl did not wake. He carried her inside, set her on the cot, checked the ankle splint, still firm. Checked her pulse again. Stronger now, with the water working through her system. Her color had improved. He pulled a thermal blanket from the footlocker and covered her to the waist, then elevated her foot on a folded jacket. She opened her eyes halfway and watched him move around the small space. He filled a clean cup with water and set it where she could reach. Crackers from the cabinet, a can of peaches he opened with his knife and set on the table with a fork. A clean shirt from the footlocker, folded, placed beside the food without comment. "Bathroom's through there. Towel on the hook. Take your time." She looked at the room, the medical kit on the counter, the ropes on the wall, the radio with its red standby light, the maroon beret on its nail. She studied everything with the careful attention of someone deciding whether a room was a shelter or a trap. She ate the crackers slowly, drank the water in measured sips, did not touch the peaches. After a while, she looked at the bathroom door, then at Colton, then at the door again. "Go ahead. I'll be outside." He stepped out and pulled the door shut. Stood on the metal step and listened to the water run inside. It ran for a long time. When someone has not had clean water on their skin in days, they do not hurry. He knew this. He had been that person, in places where the shower trailer was the first sign that the worst was over. He used the time, walked the perimeter of the trailer pad, checked the truck, checked the road below. Nothing moved except the wind through the juniper and a jackrabbit bolting across the hard-packed dirt 50 yards south. He came back to the step and sat. The water stopped. A few minutes later, the door opened and Sarah stood in the clean shirt, which hung past her thighs. Her own clothes were folded in her hands. She had washed her face, and her hair was damp and pushed behind her ears. And she looked younger than he had first guessed. Maybe not 20. 19, perhaps. Old enough to sign forms. Young enough to be signed for. "You can put those on the chair. I'll wash them later." She set the clothes down and went back to the cot. She ate 2 of the peach slices, slowly, as if learning to taste again. Echo had come inside with them. He stood near the cot, not touching her, not on the cot, just present, occupying the space between her and the rest of the room, like a piece of furniture that had decided where it belonged. Colton opened a second can, chicken broth. He heated it on the propane stove and poured it into a mug, set it on the table beside her. "Drink the broth. Your electrolytes are low." She drank. He watched her color improve with each sip. The medical part of him cataloged it automatically. Hydration returning, pallor receding, hands steadier now, ankle elevated properly, swelling beginning to stabilize. She would need a real X-ray within 48 hours, but the splint would hold until then. The non-medical part of him cataloged something else. She had not asked where she was. She had not asked to use a phone. She had not cried. Whatever had happened to her, she had processed it into a kind of operating efficiency that he recognized because he lived inside it himself. Colton moved to the counter to fill another cup. "Echo, come." The dog looked at him, looked back at the girl, did not move. Colton set the cup down and leaned against the counter. In 18 years of service and 3 years of civilian solitude, Echo had never refused a direct command. Danny had trained him from 10 weeks old, German first, then English. Fuß, Platz, bleib, heel, down, stay. Echo responded to Colton the same way he had responded to Danny, because the commands were the same, and the hands that gave them were steady in the same way. Until now. The girl's hand rested on the edge of the cot, 2 inches from Echo's nose. She was not reaching for him, not calling him. She was simply there. And he had decided that was where he needed to be. Colton understood something then that he did not enjoy understanding. The dog had made a choice. Not against Colton, for her. Because Echo had been raised by a man who recognized broken things. And whatever this girl carried in her body was broadcasting at a frequency the dog could read across a room. He let them be. He stepped outside, sat on the trailer's metal step, and watched the light change over the mesa as clouds moved above the Sangre de Cristos. The wind smelled like warm sage and distant rain that would not arrive. Inside, through the thin wall, he heard nothing. That was fine. Silence was something he understood better than most people. When he came back an hour later, she was asleep on the cot with the clean shirt pulled over her like a blanket. One hand hung off the edge, fingers still close to the dog. Echo lay on the floor beside her, chin flat, one ear raised, awake, on watch. Colton sat at the table and opened the SAR radio log. He wrote nothing. He looked at the girl's wrists, where the rope burns showed even in the dim light, and he looked at the dog who had chosen her. And he sat with both of those facts, the way you sit with ordnance you have not yet identified. Carefully, without touching, waiting to learn what you were dealing with. He thought about what the rope burns meant, not the physical fact of them, the human fact. Someone had tied this girl to something. Someone had cinched cord or rope around her wrists and left her there long enough for the skin to abrade to pink. That required a decision, not an accident, not a moment of panic. A decision made by a person who looked at another person and chose restraint over reason. He had seen restraint marks before, in places where the rules of engagement governed who you could touch and how, and for how long. In debriefs where the photographs were clinical and the language was precise, and the faces in the images belonged to people who had been treated as something less than people. He had never expected to see those marks in New Mexico, on a 19-year-old girl, made by someone who called his operation a recovery program and sent progress reports to parents. The stove clicked. Echo shifted on the floor. Outside, the wind found the gap under the trailer door and whistled thin and cold. Colton closed the radio log and set it on the table. He would not write in it tonight. What he was dealing with did not belong in a log. It belonged in a different kind of report entirely. Late that night, in the dark, she spoke. "Sarah." He looked up from the table. "My name is Sarah." Echo's head lifted, tilted to the right. The folded ear twitched. "Okay, Sarah. Don't tell anyone I'm here." He looked at the rope burns, at the splinted ankle, at the dog who had not left her side in 12 hours. "I won't. Not yet." She closed her eyes. Echo settled back onto the floor. Colton sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to the wind work the trailer walls and the girl breathe, and the dog shift once, then go still. He did not sleep. He sat at the table with the radio log closed in front of him and the lamp off, and the darkness filling the room by degrees, heavy and clean. Through the thin wall, he could hear the wind. Through the floor, he could feel the cold beginning to rise from the mesa rock underneath. The girl, called Sarah, slept the way wounded animals sleep, shallow, restless. Twice she made a sound in her throat, a small catch between dreaming and waking, and both times Echo lifted his head and waited until she settled before lowering it again. The dog did not sleep either. He lay on the floor with his eyes half open, stationed between the cot and the door. Colton watched them in the dim light that came through the window from the stars outside. He thought about what he knew and what he did not know. A girl with rope burns on her wrists, an ankle she had ruined running from something, and a refusal to give her name until the middle of the night. A request not to call anyone. The word back in her voice when she said they would send her back. He thought about the blood on the cloth Echo had found, about the drag marks and the broken branches on the trail, about the direction she had come from, southeast. 12 miles in that direction was nothing. Old ranch land, canyon country. No roads that showed on his maps. He thought about calling Ray Valdez on the SAR radio. Ray was the county coordinator, former firefighter, solid man. But county meant paperwork, which meant the sheriff's office, which meant a system Colton did not yet understand. And the girl had said, "Don't call anyone," with a fear in her voice that was not performative. So he waited. That was a skill too, not the dramatic kind, the kind where you sat in the dark and let the information arrange itself until the shape of the problem became clear enough to act on. He opened the radio log and turned to the last page of entries. 3 SAR calls in the past month. A lost hiker near the Pecos. A car that went off the grade road during a flash storm. A rancher who called in a distress signal from a stock pond and turned out to be drunk, not dying. All resolved. All ordinary. Nothing about a facility 12 miles southeast. Nothing about missing young people. Nothing about a man named Boyd Phelps running a compound in a canyon nobody visited. In the log, that part of the county was blank space, just terrain, just emptiness between GPS coordinates that nobody ever used. He closed the log and set it on the table. The trailer creaked in the wind. The propane heater cycled off, then on again. Outside, the mesa made its night sounds. Wind through scrub. The distant yip of a coyote pack on the ridge. A screech owl somewhere in the pinyon, its call thin and strange against the cold. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset. It would drop another 15 before dawn. Sarah shifted on the cot, made the small sound again. Echo's head came up, waited, went back down. The two of them had found a rhythm. She dreamed, he watched. She settled, he settled. It was a simple arrangement, and Colton envied its clarity. He did not envy much anymore. He had given that up, along with the beret and the team and the helicopter seats, and the belief that speed could save anyone if you were fast enough. But he envied this: a dog and a girl sleeping in the same room, each one keeping the other from falling too far into the dark. Outside, a coyote called once from the ridge above the trailer. Echo's ear rotated toward it, then back to the door. The propane heater clicked. The stars moved. The white truck came up the Mesa Road at 08:14. Colton heard the engine before he saw it. Sound carries on the mesa when the air is calm. He was outside, crouched by the propane tank, checking the gauge. Echo was on the trailer step, nose working. His ears went forward. Then the fur along his spine lifted in a slow wave from shoulders to tail. The truck stopped 30 yards out. 2 men climbed down, both broad, sunburned, ranch jackets and dirty boots. Working men, but not for themselves. The driver was mid-30s, thick through the arms, ball cap low over his eyes. The passenger was older, leaner, with a face made of creased leather and pale eyes that moved too much. "Help you?" The driver had a professional smile, the kind that worked on parents and school boards and anyone who wanted to believe the best about a stranger. "Morning. Real sorry to bother you. We're from Corvo Mesa Wilderness Recovery. We're looking for a young woman who walked away from our program about 3 days ago. Family is worried. Haven't seen anyone. I run trails up here every morning. I would have noticed. Her name's Sarah Hollis, 19, brown hair, slim. She's got some mental health issues, and her parents enrolled her voluntarily. We've got custody documentation right here." The older man reached into the truck cab and produced a manila folder. He handed it to Colton without expression. Colton opened it. 2 pages. The first was a custody transfer form. The second was a liability waiver with 2 signatures at the bottom. He read both, carefully, the way he read everything that carried official weight. Not the words first, the format. Form 7A, State of New Mexico, Custody Transfer. New Mexico did not use Form 7A for custody transfers. The state form was a CTS-3. He had processed more than 1,000 authorization documents during his 2 years at the ops desk, enough to know what legitimate paperwork felt like in your hands, and what forgery felt like. The paper stock was too light. The county seal at the lower left was blurred at the edges, photocopied, not embossed. The notary stamp had no registration number beneath it. These were forgeries. Good enough to wave at someone who did not know better. Not good enough for someone who did. "These look fine. I'll keep an eye out for her." He handed the folder back. The driver nodded. The older man did not nod. He was looking past Colton toward the trailer, toward the door, toward Echo, who had come down off the step and now stood between the men and the entrance. Not growling, not barking, just filling the space with 82 pounds of stillness and attention. "Nice dog." It was not a compliment. It was a measurement. He knows it. The older man held Colton's gaze a beat too long. Then he turned and walked back to the truck. The driver lingered. "She's a runaway. If you are helping her, this gets complicated for you." "Noted." They drove away. Colton watched the truck until it rounded the bend and the dust resettled on the road. He memorized the plate. New Mexico, blue frame, 74K, partial, ending in F. Echo stood beside him. The fur on his spine was still raised. Colton put his hand on the dog's head, briefly. Then he went inside. Sarah sat on the cot with her knees drawn up and her arms locked around them. She had heard everything through the wall. "They found me. They came looking. They didn't find you. They'll come back." "Probably." She looked at the door as if it might open again at any moment. "Sarah, the papers they showed me are forgeries. Wrong form number, wrong seal, no notary registration. Whoever filed that paperwork wasn't filing with the state." She stared at him. Something behind her face shifted. Not trust. The possibility that trust might exist somewhere ahead, if the road held. How do you know that? I spent 2 years processing government documents for a living. I know what a real form looks like. What do you want to know? Everything. Sarah talked. She sat with her back against the trailer wall, hands around the water cup, and told it in order. Flat voice, controlled. She had rehearsed this during 3 days alone in the desert, turning it over until the edges wore smooth enough to handle. Colton recognized the tone. He had heard it in debriefs from operators who had been held and released. You told the story straight. You did not add feeling because feeling made you stop. Her parents had signed the enrollment forms in April. $15,000 a month. The brochure showed guided hikes, group counseling, nutritional programs, a 12-week therapeutic reset in the high desert of New Mexico. Away from screens, away from pressure, away from whatever it was about their daughter they did not understand and did not have the patience to learn. My mother signed the form. She thought she was helping. What Sarah found when she arrived was not a therapy program. The compound sat 12 miles from Corvo at the end of a dirt road in a canyon that appeared on no commercial map. A man named Boyd Phelps ran it, former park ranger, fired for something Sarah never learned the details of. He had the land. He had the buildings. He had the isolation and the paperwork. And he had turned all of it into a machine. There were 8 of us when I got there, all between 18 and 21, all signed in by parents who thought they were paying for therapy. The first week, they took the phones. Not all at once. One by one, called into Boyd's office, told it was part of the digital detox protocol. Sarah handed hers over on day 3. She never saw it again. The second week, the scheduled calls home stopped. Boyd said the satellite connection was down. It stayed down. By the 3rd week, Sarah understood. The counseling sessions were not real. The counselor was one of Boyd's men, reading from a printout he did not understand. The guided hikes were work details. The nutritional program was rice, canned beans, and whatever came in on the supply truck. What the program actually required was labor. Fence construction, trail clearing, hauling lumber and cinder blocks for a building expansion Boyd was running on the south side of the compound. Digging post holes in ground so hard it took 3 people and a pry bar to start each hole. Carrying 5-gallon water containers from the tank to the barracks. Working from 6 in the morning until the light failed, and sometimes after, under generator-powered floods that attracted moths so thick they clogged the lighthousing. How many people does he have working for him? 2 full-time, the men you just met. A 3rd comes for supply runs, maybe once a week. And Boyd. Armed? Boyd carries a rifle. The other 2, I'm not sure. I saw a holster on the older one once. Did anyone try to leave before you? A boy named Marcus tried in June. They brought him back the same afternoon. He didn't talk much after that. She did not explain what they did to Marcus. The sentence did its own work. She had watched the compound for weeks, found the weak point, a drainage gap under the perimeter fence on the south side, where summer rain had eroded the ground beneath the chain link. She waited for a night when Boyd was away and only one man watched the grounds. She went through the gap at 0300 with a water bottle and a jacket and nothing else, and she ran north. North? Away. 3 days. She ran north because north was away, and away was all she had. The water ran out before the end of the first day. The desert in September was not as hot as summer, but it was hot enough. She rationed what she had, and then she had nothing, and the landscape did not care. On day 2, she found a creek, narrow, barely moving, threading through a rock cut east of the trail. She drank until her stomach hurt, filled the bottle, kept going. On day 3, she could not find the creek again. The terrain had shifted, or she had shifted, or the desert had simply decided to stop offering what she needed. She twisted her ankle coming off a rock shelf on a steep ridge, felt the joint roll and the tendons stretch beyond what tendons were meant to stretch, and sat on the ground for 10 minutes, holding the ankle and breathing through her teeth. She kept going. She wrapped the ankle with a strip torn from her shirt, and she kept going because the alternative was to stop. And stopping meant being found, and being found meant going back. The rope burns on her wrists were from the week before. Boyd had tethered her to a post in the workshop for 6 hours as punishment for asking to use a phone. Not a beating. Nothing that would leave marks a parent might see in a photograph. Just a rope and a post, and 6 hours of standing in a workshop that smelled like diesel and sawdust, while the other participants worked around her and did not make eye contact, because eye contact with a punished person was itself punishable. Colton listened. He did not interrupt. He did not plan out loud. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the pine surface and took in every word. Total intake. No visible reaction until the data was complete. That was SIR training. That was also how you kept someone talking when they were afraid that saying the wrong thing would make the listener disappear. Echo lay on the floor between them, not touching either one. Neutral ground. His ear rotated once toward the window when a gust shook the trailer. Then it came back to Sarah. How many are still in there? 6, maybe 7. Boyd was expecting someone new before I left. And your parents? They think I'm getting better. Boyd writes them emails, updates, progress reports, positive language. My mother thinks I'm hiking and journaling and learning to breathe. She set the cup down. Her hands were shaking. Her voice had not broken once. That control impressed Colton more than he would have said. He had watched men twice her age come apart under less weight. Marcus, what happened after they brought him back? He stopped eating for a while. Then he started eating again. He does what they tell him now. He doesn't look at the fence anymore. Echo shifted on the floor. He lifted his head, looked at Sarah, then lowered it with a long breath through his nose. A dog's version of acknowledgement. The room felt it. The county deputy. You said Boyd's cousin. Wade Oren. He came to the compound twice while I was there. Brought groceries. Talked with Boyd on the porch, like family. Active deputy? He wore a uniform both times. Colton stood. He went to the window. The road was empty. The mesa ran south in long undulations of red earth and juniper, the sky above it so open it seemed careless. Beautiful country. indifferent country. The kind of landscape that did not intervene in what happened inside it. He thought about the pipeline. In dock, treading water in full gear while instructors counted down the seconds and 80% of the class quit because the body said quit, and they listened. He had stayed. Danny had stayed. These kids in the compound had no pipeline, no training, no framework for understanding that what was being done to them was not legal, not normal, and not what their parents had paid for. They endured because the fence was high and the desert was wide, and the man with the rifle had a cousin in a uniform. 6 people, maybe 7, behind wire, 12 miles from the nearest town, with a man who owned a rifle and a cousin who owned a badge. Echo stood too. He left Sarah, crossed the room, and pushed his nose once into Colton's open palm. Then he returned to the cot and sat at Sarah's feet, looking back at Colton, waiting. I need to see it. You can't go alone. I go most places alone. That's not the same thing. She was right. He knew it. But calling county meant calling the cousin. Doing nothing was the one thing 18 years of pipeline had never trained him to do. I need to see what we're dealing with. Then I figure out who to call. Sarah looked at Echo. Echo looked at Colton. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open for anyone. The radio is channel 7. You pick it up, you say your location, and you need help. That's all. What about Echo? Colton looked at the dog who had refused a direct command for the first time in 5 years because a stranger needed him more than his handler did. He stays with you. He took his pack, binoculars, water, knife, nothing else. He was not going to fight anyone. He was going to look. He stood at the counter for a moment and looked at the maroon beret on the nail. Danny had worn his the way all PJs did, cocked right, broken in at the flash. Colton had worn his for 14 years, same angle, same break. Now it hung on a nail in a trailer in New Mexico, collecting dust above a door he was about to walk through, toward a thing he did not fully understand. That others may live. The words had been printed on every document he had ever signed, stamped on every certificate, sewn into the lining of every piece of gear. He had said them at graduation. He had said them at Danny's memorial. He had said them to himself on a helicopter floor, with Danny's blood on his hands, and 30 seconds that would never come back. He had never stopped meaning them. He had only stopped believing they were enough. He shouldered the pack. The door opened on hard sunlight. The road down the mesa was clear. Blue sky. No dust trail. No engine sound. 12 miles southeast, in a canyon that no one visited and no one inspected, 6 or 7 people sat behind a fence and waited for something they could not name. Colton. He turned. Sarah stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame for balance. Her face was composed, steady. Whatever fear lived inside her, she had packed it down below the surface, the way smart people pack fear. Not gone, just stored. Come back. He looked at her. He looked at Echo, who sat at her feet, one ear up, one ear folded. He pulled the door shut behind him and walked toward the road. The trail to the compound was not a trail. It was a scar in the landscape that someone had been driving over long enough to press ruts into the dirt. Colton found it 2 miles past the county road turnoff, where the mesa shelf dropped into a series of shallow canyons running southeast. The ruts were deep. Heavy vehicle. Repeated passes. He followed them on foot, staying 20 yards off the track on the higher ground where the juniper grew thick enough to break his outline. He moved steadily, not fast, deliberate. Eyes working a pattern he had learned before most civilians learned to drive. Sky, ridgeline, middle ground, near ground, feet. Every 30 seconds, the cycle reset. The air smelled like dust, warm rock, and juniper sap. Without echo, the silence was different, fuller. The dog's presence on a trail was a kind of conversation. Nose reports and ear adjustments, and the occasional glance back that said, "I'm still here." Without that conversation, Colton was alone with the landscape and the sound of his own boots, and the knowledge that he was walking towards something he did not fully understand. The canyon walls rose on both sides as he descended, sandstone and red earth in horizontal bands. Pinyon and juniper thinned. The air grew warmer. At mile 8, he found the first sign of the compound's perimeter. A strand of wire strung between 2 juniper posts, chest height. Not barbed, not electrified. Just a boundary marker that said, "You are entering something." He stepped over it and kept walking. At mile 9, he caught diesel exhaust on the thermal draft. The generator. Close now. He found boot prints in a dry wash. 2 sets. 1 heavy, 1 light. The lighter prints matched pace with the heavier ones. Not choosing pace. Being paced. He photographed both and kept moving. At mile 10, the canyon bent south. He left the wash and climbed the east wall to a rock shelf that gave him elevation. Belly down on the warm sandstone, he pulled the binoculars and glassed the canyon ahead. The compound sat a quarter-mile south, in a wide spot where the canyon opened into a shallow bowl. The bones of the place had been a ranch once. A main building, long and low, with a corrugated tin roof and a covered porch facing east. Behind it, a newer structure, cinder block, small windows set high, flat roof. It had the look of something built for function, not comfort. Beyond that, a workshop with a diesel generator running outside. The exhaust stack put a thin gray line into the still air. The sound of the generator reached him as a low, constant hum. Chain link fence, 6 feet high. Angled wire at the top, not razor, but sufficient. The fence enclosed the main buildings and about 2 acres of cleared ground. A gate on the east side, closed. The white truck parked near the workshop. Same truck, same plate. He watched for 30 minutes. The first person emerged from the cinder block building at 11:40. A young man, early 20s, carrying a post hole digger. He walked to the fence line on the south side and started working. No one stood over him. No one needed to. The older man from yesterday sat on the porch of the main building with a coffee mug and a clear sightline to every part of the compound. A second young person came out, then a third. He counted, kept counting. 7. All young, all working, digging, hauling lumber from a stack near the workshop, carrying 5-gallon water containers from a tank to the cinder block building. One of them limped badly on the left leg, dragging it through the dirt with each step. None of them spoke to each other. None of them looked at the fence. Through the binoculars, he could see inside the cinder block building through one of the high windows. Cots, 8 of them, lined along the wall. Thin mattresses, no sheets that he could see. A single overhead light, fluorescent, the kind that turned everything underneath it the color of sickness. No locks on the outside of the barracks door. But the fence made locks unnecessary. The gate was the only exit, and the porch had eyes on it all day. A fourth figure appeared on the porch, older than the others, taller, lean in a way that spoke of hard living rather than fitness. He wore a canvas jacket and jeans and boots that had seen years of ranch work. He carried a rifle in the crook of his left arm, casually, like an umbrella he expected to need. He stood on the porch and surveyed the compound, then said something to the man with the coffee. The man laughed. The one with the rifle did not. Boyd Phelps. Had to be. The body language matched what Sarah had described. The man who owned the land and the buildings and the fence and the paperwork, and who had decided that those things gave him ownership of the people inside them. Colton lowered the binoculars. He had seen enough. He lay still for another 5 minutes, recording the layout in his mind. Gate orientation, east. Fence height, 6 feet plus angled wire. Distance from fence to main building, 40 yards. From barracks to workshop, 60. Generator, southeast corner. Vehicle positions, 2 trucks now, the white one and a darker pickup near the gate. Personnel count. Boyd, 2 associates, 7 confined individuals. Terrain. Approach from the north through the canyon was the most concealed route. The east ridge offered elevation, but no cover for the last 200 yards. He backed off the shelf, stayed low for 200 yards. Then he turned north and began the walk back. The sun was falling behind the Sangre de Cristos when he reached the trailer 4 hours later. His shoulder ached from the pack straps. His mouth was dry. His boots were coated in red canyon dust. He opened the door. Seta was sitting at the table with the SAR radio in front of her. She had not used it. The Channel 7 light blinked steady red. Echo stood at the sound of the latch, crossed the room to Colton, and pushed his nose once into his open palm. A check. Alive. Here. Confirmed. Then he went back to Seta and sat at her feet. She read Colton's face. How bad? 7 people. Fence. 2 buildings. Generator. Boyd carries a rifle. Your description was accurate. I know what I saw. I believe you. I'm telling you what I confirmed. She waited. It's not a ranch. It's not a program. It's a compound. I know what it is. I lived in it. He sat down across from her, Echo lay between them on the floor. The propane heater ticked. Outside, the last daylight turned the mesa the color of old copper and then began to fade. I'm not going to call county. Because of Wade. Because of Wade. Because a deputy who brings groceries to a compound where people are held behind wire is not a deputy who's going to help those people get out. She nodded. She had known this. She had been waiting to see if he would know it too. I know a man on the SAR network. Ray Valdez, former firefighter, county coordinator. He's not law enforcement. He's not connected to Boyd. I trust him enough to ask a question without explaining why. What question? Who do you call when the local system is the problem? State police, federal if it goes that far. And if Boyd finds out you're asking before anyone comes? Colton looked at her. He did not answer the question directly. He did not need to. The gear by the door answered it. The training answered it. The 18 years of going into places where the local power structure was the threat answered it. He won't find out from Ray. And he won't find out from me. What about from me? He looked at her carefully. She met his eyes without flinching. It was not a challenge. It was an offer. She was telling him she could keep quiet. She was telling him she had been keeping quiet for months. You stay here. You stay off the road. If anyone comes, you do not open the door. Echo stays with you. She nodded once. Tomorrow, I make the call. Colton did not sleep that night. He lay on the trailer floor with a folded blanket under his shoulders and his boots within arm's reach, reviewing the compound layout in his mind. Fence, northwest sag point. Generator, single failure for all lighting. Guard circuit, 4 minutes, south and east only. North side blind. Boyd in the main building, west end. Barracks, 7 cots. Gate chained at night. 1 padlock. 7 people. Locked in by a padlock and a fence, and a man with a rifle, and the simple mathematics of isolation. Sarah had spent the evening drawing a compound map from memory. Gate here. Barracks here. Workshop here. Guard route marked with dotted lines. She drew without speaking, her pencil moving in short, sure strokes. She had been building her own operational plan for months, piece by piece, detail by detail. She was tougher than he had first estimated. That reassured him and frightened him in equal measure. Tough people take risks. Tough people with no training take the wrong risks at the wrong time. And the toughness that got them this far becomes the thing that gets them caught. He slept 2 hours, woke at 05:15, checked the radio, checked Echo, checked Sarah, all present, all breathing. He made coffee, black, same mug, same chip. He made the call at 06:30, before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Ray Valdez answered on the second ring. His voice had the gravel of early morning and too many years of smoke inhalation. Ray, it's Draper. Colton, you never call this early unless someone's hurt. Nobody's hurt yet. I need a name. Someone at the state level who handles situations outside county jurisdiction. Federal contact if you have one. Ray was quiet for a moment. Colton could hear a coffee maker running in the background, a chair creaking. What kind of situation? The kind where the county can't help. Another pause, longer this time. I've got a name at the state police. Lieutenant named Garza. She handles cases that cross jurisdictional lines. I've worked with her twice. She's solid. I also know a guy at the U.S. Marshal's office in Albuquerque, but that's a bigger lever. Give me Garza first. I'll call if I need the bigger lever. Ray read off a number. Colton wrote it on the back of a SAR log page. Colton. Yeah? You want to tell me what this is about? Not yet. Soon. I need to be sure of what I'm looking at before I put it on anyone else's desk. That sounds like you're about to do something alone that you shouldn't do alone. I've been doing things alone for 3 years, Ray. That's not the selling point you think it is. I'll call you. I promise. He hung up. Sarah was standing in the bathroom doorway, watching. She had heard enough. When? I'll call Garza today. But state police doesn't move on a phone call from a stranger. I need something to give her. Evidence. Something more than my word and yours. What kind of evidence? He thought about it. The compound was 12 miles away. The fake custody papers were in Boyd's hands, not his. Sarah's testimony was powerful, but uncorroborated. A state police lieutenant would need something concrete before sending officers into a remote canyon based on one call. I need to go back, closer this time. Photographs if I can get them. Documentation of the fence, the work details, the conditions. Something Garza can look at and know this isn't a dispute between a runaway and a program. You said you weren't going to fight anyone. I'm not. I'm going to document. That's different. Sarah looked at him, then at Echo. The dog sat between them, head moving from one to the other, tracking the conversation like movement on a trail. When do you go? Tonight, after dark. I want to help. No. I know that compound. I know where the blind spots are. I know when Boyd sleeps and when the guards switch. And you have a splinted ankle and 72 hours of recovery in your body. You're not going. She set her jaw. He recognized the expression. It was the same one he saw in young operators who had been told no and were calculating whether to obey or to find another way. Sarah, I need you here, on the radio. If something goes wrong out there, you're my only contact. That landed differently. Not an order, a mission assignment. She was not being left behind. She was being given a post. He spent the next 2 hours preparing. He cleared the table and laid everything out. Same order as every mission for 18 years. Pack. Water, 2 liters. Protein bars. Binoculars. Folding knife, edge tested against his thumbnail. LED flashlight with a red filter that would preserve his night vision. Phone. Charged. Camera cleared of old files. 50 feet of climbing rope. Carabiner. The SAR radio, tuned to channel 7. Medical kit, condensed to essentials. Gauze, tape, tourniquet, shears, ibuprofen. He checked each item twice. Then he arranged them in the pack by access order. Things he might need fast went on top. Things he hoped he would not need went to the bottom. The tourniquet went in the left side pocket, where his hand could find it without looking. The shears went beside the gauze. The radio went in the top flap, antenna down, volume preset to low. This was the part of the process that civilians never understood. They saw the action, the helicopter, the fast rope, the weapon up and the door breached. They did not see the 40 minutes before, when a man sat alone with his gear and ran the mission forward in his mind, step by step, decision by decision, until every contingency had a plan, and every plan had a fallback, and every fallback had a point where you accepted that some things could not be planned for, and you went anyway. He had done this before every deployment, before every mission, before every extraction. The ritual was the same, whether the objective was a village in Helmand or a compound in a New Mexico canyon. You prepared your hands. You prepared your mind. You accepted that the gap between preparation and reality was where people died or didn't, and you narrowed that gap by every fraction you could manage. Sarah watched from the cot. She did not interrupt. She seemed to understand that this was not packing. It was ritual, the kind of thing a man does when he is preparing his hands for hours that will matter more than the years that preceded them. He showed her the radio, held it up, and pointed to the buttons. Push this button. Hold it down. Say, "My location is the Draper Trailer, Mesa Road, Corvo. I need help." Release. Wait 10 seconds. Repeat. She took the radio from him, tested the button. Her thumb found the transmit switch on the first try. She had been watching him check it every morning for 3 days. Channel 7 is SAR. Channel 12 is mutual aid. Start with 7. If no answer in 60 seconds, switch to 12. "I know. I've been listening." He looked at her. There was something in her expression that reminded him of young operators who arrived at a unit already knowing the job because they had been studying it before anyone gave them the gear. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. She had been trapped, which was different. "If I'm not back by 0600, you call Ray Valdez first, then Lieutenant Garza. The numbers are on the table." She picked up the paper and looked at it. "What do I tell them?" "Tell them a retired PJ went 12 miles southeast into a canyon and didn't come back. They'll know what to do." "One more thing. If nobody answers the radio and I don't come back, you walk to town. North on the Mesa Road, 4 miles to the gas station. Tell the first person you see your name and that you need state police. Not county, not anyone named Orrin." "I know who to avoid." "I know you do. I'm saying it out loud so we both hear it." She almost smiled. It did not fully arrive, but the shape of it was there, in the corners of her mouth and the change around her eyes. The closest thing to warmth he had seen from her since the arroyo. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket, not on the table, where she could reach it in the dark without searching. Echo watched the gear preparation from the floor beside the cot. He knew what packing looked like. He knew what a mission smelled like. His eyes tracked Colton's movements with the focused attention of a dog who expected to be included. "Not this time, buddy." Echo's ear folded forward. He did not move from Sarah's side, but his eyes stayed on the pack, and on Colton, and on the door. "Stay. Guard." The dog held his gaze. Then he lowered his head onto his paws. He would stay. He would guard. But the look he gave Colton said he was making a note of it. Colton left at 21:30, full dark. No moon until after midnight. Stars so thick the sky looked crowded. He drove the first 4 miles with the headlights off, navigating by starlight and memory. He had driven this road enough times for SAR calls that his hands knew the turns before his eyes confirmed them. At the junction where the county road met the old ranch track, he pulled off behind a stand of juniper and killed the engine. The rest was on foot. 12 miles of mesa and canyon in darkness. He moved by terrain features and star position. Helmand rules. Kunar rules. Same rules. The North Star over his left shoulder, the canyon walls as guide rails. Wind direction steady from the northwest, carrying his scent away from the compound. The desert at night was a different country. Cooler, louder than people expected. The wind moved through scrub with a dry whisper. Small animals rustled in the brush. A great horned owl called from somewhere above the canyon rim, its voice low and hollow. His boots crunched softly on gravel and packed sand. He reached the perimeter wire at 0040, stepped over it, continued south through the thinning juniper. The hum of the generator reached him first, then the glow of a single light in the main building. He approached from the northwest this time, where the canyon wall came closest to the fence. A rock formation 60 yards out provided cover. He settled behind it, prone on cold sandstone, and began documenting. The phone camera worked poorly in the dark. He waited for the generator floodlight to illuminate what it could. The fence in harsh white, the angled wire catching light, the barracks with its high windows dark, the workshop, both trucks. At 1:15, the main building door opened. Boyd came out onto the porch. He stood for a full minute, looking at the dark. He lit a cigarette. The orange point moved as he turned his head, scanning the perimeter, scanning the canyon, scanning with the attention of a man whose operation depended on nobody looking too closely. Boyd went back inside. At 0200, the older associate walked the fence line. Loose circuit. South and east only. Gate chain check. 4 minutes. He went back in without checking the north side. Same weak pattern as daytime. The northwest corner gap was clear. The fence sagged where erosion had undermined the posts. Chain link loose at the bottom. Not enough to slide under. Enough to cut. He photographed everything. The gap. The erosion. Wide angles of each building. Window count. Door positions. Generator and fuel tank. The cable running to the main building. At 0245, he withdrew. Stayed low for 200 yards. Reached the truck at 0530 and drove back in pre-dawn gray. Sarah was awake with the radio in front of her. Echo was at the door before the latch clicked. "I got what we need." He showed her the photos. She studied them, pushed the phone back. "That's where Marcus sleeps. Third window from the left. We're going to get him out. All of them." He called Lieutenant Garza at 1400, gave her the short version. Fraudulent program, 7 confined, armed operator, compromised deputy, photos, and a witness. Garza asked 3 questions, answered each. Then, silence. 48 to 72 hours for warrants and a team, federal coordination. Don't go back to the compound. 48 hours. I'll do my best. He told Sarah. 48 hours. The system moving at the speed of paperwork while 7 people worked behind a fence. Sarah nodded. She asked practical questions. When would Garza call back? What should they do in the meantime? Practical questions from someone who had decided to trust the plan even if they do not trust the timeline. We wait. We stay off the road. We don't give Boyd any reason to know we're a problem. She nodded again. What he did not say was that waiting was the hardest part of any operation. He had waited in hide sites for 72 hours in Afghanistan, watching a target compound, unable to move until the order came. He had waited in the back of helicopters for the green light, while somewhere below, people were dying. Waiting was not passive. Waiting was a discipline that required more strength than action, because action gave you something to do with the fear, and waiting gave you nothing but time to carry it. He sat on the trailer step that evening and watched the sun go down. Echo came out and sat beside him, not touching, close enough. The dog's ears worked the silence. A hawk called somewhere over the mesa. The wind had died. The sky turned colors he had no names for. Orange into copper. Copper into violet. Violet into something darker that was not quite black, but held the memory of all the colors that had come before. The mesa went quiet. Even the wind stopped, as if the landscape had taken a breath and held it. He thought about Danny. Not the usual flash of heat and noise. He thought about Danny before all of it. Danny at Indoc, who smiled too much for a PJ candidate and could hold his breath longer than anyone in the pool, because, he said, he had grown up diving for crawfish in Louisiana bayous, and his lungs had never learned the concept of empty. Danny, who trained Echo from a puppy, who talked to the dog in a mixture of German commands and Cajun French that somehow the dog understood perfectly, who spent his leave time sending video messages to his mother, showing her the mountains of Afghanistan and saying, "See, Ma, it's just like camping, except everybody's got a weapon, and the coffee is worse." Danny, who was 24 years old, 11 months in country, 30 seconds from the helicopter. The extraction had been hot. Small arms fire from 3 positions on the hillside. Colton had called the bird, popped smoke, cleared the landing zone. Danny was the last man on the ground, 50 yards out, running hard with a casualty over his shoulders. The bird came in loud and low. The ramp dropped. Colton grabbed the casualty and pulled. Danny was right behind him. Right there. The RPG hit the tail rotor. The bird jerked hard. The pilot fought it, held for 2 seconds, then called abort and lifted. The ramp came up with Colton and the casualty inside, and Danny still on the ground. Colton had screamed. He remembered that. Screaming for the bird to hold, to set back down, to give him 30 seconds. The crew chief held him back. The bird climbed. Through the open door, he saw Danny standing on the hillside with his weapon up, still covering their departure, because that was what PJs did. They covered each other, even when the math said run. Danny went down 11 seconds after the bird cleared the ridge. 2 rounds, chest and thigh. By the time the QRF reached him, he had been down for 9 minutes. He was conscious for 5. The last thing he said, according to the QRF medic, was, "Take care of Echo." 3 years ago, the dog sat beside Colton now on a metal step in New Mexico, breathing in the thin mountain air with the patience of an animal that had outlived one handler and accepted another without complaint. Colton put his hand on Echo's back. The fur was warm from the sun that had already set. 2 days, buddy. Echo's tail moved once, then still. In the morning, he would call Garza. In 48 hours, a team would come. The system would work. The fence would come down. 7 people would walk out of a canyon they had entered thinking they were being helped. And they would learn, slowly, that help was a word some people used like fences. To contain, to control, to keep things where you wanted them. He went inside. Sarah was asleep on the cot, one arm hanging off the edge. The notepad was on the table, open to the compound map she had been drawing all day. Echo went to his position on the floor between the cot and the door. He circled once and lay down. Colton sat at the table and looked at Sarah's map. The detail was remarkable. She had marked the guard patrol route, the generator position, the drainage gap in the fence, the location of each cot in the barracks. She had numbered the people, 1 through 7. Beside number 3, she had written, Marcus. He closed the notepad and set it beside the radio. It lasted 31 hours. On the second afternoon, while Colton was inside reviewing the photographs and planning contingency routes in case Garza's timeline slipped further, Sarah saw the truck. She was sitting near the window. She had been sitting near windows for 2 days, watching the road, unable to stop watching it. The stillness of the trailer made her restless in a way that Colton recognized. It was the restlessness of someone who had been confined and freed and now felt the walls closing in again, even walls that meant safety. The white truck passed below the mesa on the county road heading south. Sarah went still. Colton? He came to the window. That's them. But the plate is different. He looked. She was right. Same truck. White. Same body damage on the rear quarter panel. But the plate frame was dark instead of light. They had swapped plates. Sarah's face had changed. Not panic. Calculation. She was thinking what Colton was thinking. If they swapped plates, they knew someone had taken the old number. They were adapting. They were not stupid. The truck disappeared around the bend, heading south toward town. They don't know where you are. If they knew, they wouldn't be driving past. They'd be here. They're looking. They're always looking. That doesn't mean they're finding. She turned from the window, looked at Echo, looked at the door, looked at the notepad on the table where she had been writing down everything she could remember about the compound. Names, dates, descriptions. A map drawn from memory, rough but detailed. She had been building her own evidence file without being asked. 20 minutes later, the truck came back north on the same road, slower this time. Sarah watched it. Her hands were flat on the table. Colton saw what she was doing before she did it. She was memorizing the new plate, part of the number, the part she could read from this distance and this angle. Then she stood up. I can see the last 3 digits if I go to the road. Sit down. The angle from here cuts off the plate. If I go to the bend, 30 yards, I can read it clearly. They already passed. They're heading north. You're not going outside.
I can help. I can get the plate number and come right back. 30 seconds.
He should have said no again. He should have said it harder. He should have physically blocked the door. Instead, he hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. Because she was right about the angle, and she was right about the plate, and she had spent 2 days watching and documenting and doing exactly what he had taught her to do. And in that 1 second of hesitation, she was already moving. She grabbed the notepad. She moved fast on the splinted ankle, faster than he thought she could. The door opened. Sunlight, dry air, the road. Sarah, stop! She was at the bend in the road, 30 yards from the trailer. She looked south, then north, then held the notepad up and wrote. The pencil moved. She turned to come back. The truck was parked in the tree line 200 yards north, engine off, waiting. Colton saw it a half second after she did. The white truck pulled off into the juniper shadow, facing south, not driving, parked. They had not passed and continued north. They had circled back and stopped. They had been watching the trailer from the tree line while Colton watched the road from inside. The engine started. The truck pulled out of the juniper and accelerated down the road toward the bend. Sarah, run! She ran. The ankle buckled on the 3rd step. She caught herself, kept going, hobbling now. The truck closed the distance. Colton was off the step and sprinting. Echo was past him before he covered 10 yards, running flat out, ears back, a black and tan streak against the red dirt. The truck reached the bend, braked hard. Dust cloud. 2 doors opened. The older man got out fast. The driver came around the front. Echo hit the older man before Colton could. Not teeth, shoulder. 82 pounds at full speed into the man's thigh, driving him sideways into the truck door. The man swore and swung. Echo dodged the fist, circled, and put himself between the man and Sarah. Barking now. Short, sharp, controlled. Not rage. Warning. The driver reached Sarah first. He grabbed her arm. She twisted. The notepad fell in the dirt. Let her go. Colton covered the last 15 yards at a run. The driver saw him coming and did something that changed the calculus. He pulled Sarah in front of him and stepped back toward the truck. A shield. Let her go. The driver smiled. The professional smile. She's a participant in a licensed program. You're interfering with a custodial arrangement. This is kidnapping. Those papers are forged and you know it. Take it up with the court. We're taking her back. Echo was still between the older man and the group, holding his ground. The older man had his hand near his belt. Colton did not see a weapon, but the hand position said one was there or nearby. Sarah looked at Colton. Her face was white. Her eyes were clear. She was not screaming. She was not fighting. She had gone still, the way animals go still when they know that movement will make things worse. The driver opened the truck's rear door with his free hand. He pushed Sarah toward it. Don't. It was the only word she said. Not to the driver, to Colton. Don't let this happen. The driver shoved her into the back seat. The older man moved toward the driver's side, keeping his body between Echo and the cab. Echo lunged. The man kicked. Boot caught Echo on the ribs. The dog yelped once and fell back, but did not retreat. He stood his ground, shaking, and barked again. The truck doors slammed. Engine roared. Gravel sprayed as the truck fishtailed onto the road, heading south. Colton stood in the settling dust, his heart hammered. His hands were open at his sides, empty, useless. Echo limped to him. The kick had caught him along the left ribs. The dog pressed his head against Colton's thigh and stood there, breathing hard. Not injured badly, bruised, angry in the way dogs are angry when they have failed to protect someone they chose. On the ground, the notepad lay open. Sarah's handwriting. The last 3 digits of the new plate. Below that, a line she must have written before she went outside, while he was at the window, before any of it happened. In case I don't come back, tell them everything. Don't wait for warrants. Colton picked up the notepad. He read the line twice. Then he closed it and held it against his chest. In Kunar province, on a hillside the color of dust, he had knelt beside a young man named Danny Lusk and tried to stop the bleeding while the helicopter rose without them. 30 seconds. The bird could not wait. The fire was too heavy. Danny had looked up at him with an expression Colton could never forget, because it was not fear. It was surprise. As if dying were something that happened to other people, and his body had simply not received that information yet. Danny was 24. His hands were still warm when the medics arrived. The tire tracks ran south into the canyon. 12 miles. The same 12 miles Colton had walked twice already. The same dirt road, the same fence, the same compound. She had done exactly what he taught her. Observe, note, report. She had used his own training against the silence he had imposed, and the world had punished her for it. Not because she was careless, because she was brave in a way that outran her experience, and he had not been fast enough to close the gap. He went inside. Echo followed, limping slightly. Colton knelt and ran his fingers along the dog's left ribs, pressing carefully, feeling for give or grind. No fracture. The intercostal muscles were tender. Echo flinched once, but held still. Bruising. Sore for days. Colton gave him water. The dog drank steadily, then lay down on the cool floor with his chin on his paws. His eyes did not close. They tracked Colton across the room. Colton washed his hands at the small sink. Red dust. Dirt under his nails. He washed them slowly, the way he always washed them after losing someone, as if the water could clean deeper than the skin. He looked at the radio, at the phone, at the maroon beret on the nail, at the cot where Sarah had slept for 3 nights, the pillow still holding the shape of her head, the clean shirt folded at the foot where she had left it that morning. The trailer felt different without her. Not emptier. Emptier was the wrong word. It felt like a position that had been overrun. Everything still standing. Nothing still held. He sat at the table and opened her notepad. The compound map. The names. The patrol schedule. The drainage gap in the south fence. She had been building her own evidence file without being asked, preparing for a rescue she did not know would come. He turned to the last written page. Her handwriting, small and precise. The old plate number, the new plate, last 3 digits. And below that, the line she must have written before she walked outside. In case I don't come back, tell them everything. Don't wait for warrants. She had known the risk. She had calculated it without training, without backup, without anyone telling her it was the right call. And she had walked outside anyway because the plate number mattered more to her than her own safety. She had done exactly what he taught her. Observe, note, report. And the world had punished her for it. Not because she was careless, because she was brave in a way that outran her experience, and he had not been fast enough to close the gap. Sarah was behind that fence again. 8 people now. Because he had hesitated for 1 second while a 19-year-old girl moved faster than his caution could catch. He picked up the phone and called Garza. Lieutenant, Colton Draper. The witness has been taken back to the compound. Silence on the other end. I'm not waiting 48 hours. You can bring the warrants or you can bring them after, but I'm going in tonight. Garza's voice came back sharp. Mr. Draper, if you interfere with an active investigation, you could jeopardize the entire case. Any evidence collected outside a legal framework will be inadmissible. You could be charged with trespassing, assault, obstruction. There is a 19-year-old girl behind a fence with a man who carries a rifle. If I wait for your timeline, I can't guarantee what happens to her. That is not your call to make. It became my call when she asked me to help her, and I said yes. Garza was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. I can have a team at your location by 0400 tomorrow. State Police Tactical Unit plus federal support. That's 16 hours. Can you wait 16 hours? He looked at Echo. The dog was lying on the floor, head up, watching him. One ear straight, one folded. Patient. Ready. I'll be at the compound at 0400. Your team meets me there. If they're late, I go in without them. Mr. Draper, 0400, 12 miles southeast of Corvo, end of the Canyon Road. You'll see the fence. He hung up before she could answer. He sat at the table and opened Sarah's notepad. Her map of the compound, drawn from memory. Gate east, barracks north wall. Boyd's quarters in the main building, west end. Workshop, southeast. Generator, outside workshop. Guard rotation, 1 man, roughly every 2 hours, 4-minute circuit. The drainage gap in the south fence. He studied it for 10 minutes. Then he turned to a blank page and began planning his approach. Entry point, timeline, contingencies. What to do if Boyd was awake. What to do if the associates were armed. What to do if 16 hours became 17, or 20, or never. He packed. Different gear this time. The climbing rope, the knife, the red filter flashlight, medical kit, the SAR radio, zip ties, not weapons, tools. He checked Echo's ribs one more time. The dog stood for the examination without complaint, turning his head to watch Colton's hands. When Colton stepped back, Echo shook once, hard, full body, and walked to the door. You sure? Echo sat, looked at the door, looked back. All right, on me. He opened the door. The night was cold and clear. Stars piled on stars. The mesa dropped away into darkness below them, and somewhere 12 miles south, behind a fence he had already mapped in his mind, 7 people waited for something they could not name. One of them had a splinted ankle and a notepad full of evidence and a line that said, "Don't wait for warrants." Colton Draper pulled the door shut. He looked at the maroon beret on its nail. He left it there. He did not need it. The man who wore it was already walking. They left the trailer at 21:30, full dark, no moon for another 2 hours. The stars were thick enough to cast faint shadows on the Mesa Road. Colton drove the first 4 miles with the headlights off. He knew this road. 3 years of SAR calls at odd hours had mapped it into his hands. The turns came before his eyes confirmed them. The truck rolled quietly over packed dirt, engine low, windows down so he could listen to the night. Echo sat in the passenger seat, upright, ears working. His ribs were bruised from the kick that afternoon, and when he had jumped into the truck, he had favored the left side for a half-second before correcting. Colton had watched that correction and understood what it meant. The dog was hurt. The dog was coming anyway. There was no command in any language that would have kept him at the trailer tonight. At the junction where the county road met the old ranch track, Colton pulled off behind a stand of juniper and killed the engine. He sat for 60 seconds, listening. Wind through brush. A distant engine on the highway, miles south, fading. Nothing close. He opened the door. Echo dropped out beside him, silent. No tags jingling. Colton had removed the collar tags before they left. Operational habit. Sound discipline. In the field, anything that clinked or rattled got taped down or taken off. Echo wore his leather collar, nothing more. 12 miles. Canyon terrain. Night. They moved. Colton set the pace. Steady, not fast. Fast created noise. Fast created mistakes. Fast was for extraction, not approach. He walked with his weight on the balls of his feet, placing each step on solid ground, avoiding the loose scree that would shift and scatter. Star navigation. North Star over his left shoulder. The canyon walls rising on either side as they descended from the mesa shelf into the deeper terrain. Echo moved ahead of him. 3 yards. 5. Never more than 10. The dog worked the night air with his nose, sampling in short pulls, his body low and fluid. When he stopped, Colton stopped. When he moved, Colton moved. They had never rehearsed this. They did not need to. Danny had trained Echo for exactly this kind of movement, and Colton's body remembered the same rhythms from 14 years of night operations. The language between them was older than words. At mile 4, Echo stopped. Full freeze. Head up, ears forward. Colton dropped to one knee and waited. His hand went flat, palm down. Down. Echo dropped to his belly without a sound. 20 seconds. 30. The dog's nose worked the air in short, rapid pulls. Then his body softened. He rose, shook once, and continued. A coyote in the brush. Or a mule deer bedded down. Not human. Colton did not question that assessment. He had trusted sensor equipment that cost 6 figures and been wrong. He had never trusted Echo and been wrong. At mile 6, the canyon narrowed. The walls closed to 40 feet apart, and the floor became rock and gravel instead of sand. Their footfalls echoed faintly off the sandstone. Colton slowed the pace. He placed each boot on flat stone, avoiding the loose scree that would roll and clatter in the confined space. Echo adjusted without being told. His paws found the same flat surfaces, the same quiet. They moved through the narrow section in sync, 2 shapes against the dark canyon wall, each one reading the other's movement without looking. The narrow section opened after 200 yards. The canyon widened again. Stars reappeared above them where the walls dropped. At mile 7, they crossed the dry wash. The boot prints from 2 days ago were still there, softened by wind. He did not stop. He knew where they led. At mile 8, Echo stopped. His whole body went low and flat. Colton froze. He raised his fist. Stop. Unnecessary. The dog was already stopped, but the signal mattered. It meant they were operating in the same language, Danny's language. The hand signals a dead man had taught a dog and a living man still used because they worked better than words in the dark. 20 seconds. Echo's nose sampled. Then his body softened. He rose and continued. Not human, not threat. Something else in the brush. Colton exhaled and followed. At mile 9, the generator hum reached them. Low, constant, a mechanical heartbeat in the silence of the canyon. Echo's ears locked on it and stayed. Colton checked his watch. 01:30. The compound was 2 miles ahead. Garza's team was due at 0400, 2.5 hours. He found a position on the East Canyon wall, behind a sandstone outcrop that gave him a view of the compound below. He settled in. Echo lay beside him, belly flat on the cold rock, chin on his paws. They watched. The compound was lit by a single floodlight mounted on the workshop roof, powered by the generator. It threw a harsh white circle over the yard between the buildings. Beyond the circle, shadow. The barracks was dark. The main building had 1 window lit, west end, Boyd's quarters. At 01:45, the older associate came out of the main building and walked the fence line. Same pattern Colton had observed on the night reconnaissance. South side, east side, gate check. 4 minutes. He went back inside. At 02:15, the light in Boyd's window went off. At 02:45, Colton began his approach. He left the rock shelf and descended the canyon wall on the north side, where the slope was steep but manageable. Loose dirt, exposed roots. He went down backward, facing the wall, using his hands for balance. Echo followed. The dog's claws scraped once on the sandstone. Once. Then silence. He found his footing and continued. At the base of the wall, 50 yards from the northwest corner of the fence, Colton stopped. He pulled the wire cutters from his pack. He had not brought them originally. He had gone back to the trailer toolbox at the last minute. A pair of fencing pliers. Heavy, ugly, effective. He approached the fence in a low crouch. The chain link sagged at the northwest corner, where rain erosion had undermined the posts. He had photographed this 2 nights ago. Now he put his hands on the metal and felt it give. 3 cuts. Bottom rail. Then the mesh on either side, 18 inches wide. He pulled the flap up and held it. Echo went through first, belly low, ears flat, moving like water through a gap in rock. Colton followed. The mesh caught his pack and he twisted free. Inside. They were in the compound. The yard was 30 yards wide between the fence and the barracks. Open ground. The floodlight covered half of it. The other half was shadow, thrown by the workshop wall. Colton moved through the shadow. Echo at his left knee, close enough to touch, but never touching. A space between them that was calibrated by years of a dead man's training and 3 years of a living man's trust. He raised his left fist. Stop. Echo stopped, sat, ears flat, eyes on Colton's hand. 2 fingers, pointed left, flank. Echo moved left along the workshop wall, silent, disappearing into the shadow between the generator housing and a stack of lumber. He would hold there until called. Colton moved right, toward the barracks. The door was closed, not locked. He had seen that through the binoculars. No exterior lock. The fence was the lock. He reached the door, put his hand on the handle, listened. Inside, breathing, the sound of sleep. Multiple people in a small room, the air thick with it. He opened the door. The barracks was a single room, 8 cots along the walls, 4 on each side, a center aisle, 1 fluorescent light overhead, off. The high windows let in faint starlight. He could see shapes on the cots, 7 of them occupied. The nearest figure sat up the moment the door opened, not startled, alert, waiting. Sarah. She was on the first cot inside the door. She had not been sleeping. She was sitting with her knees drawn up and her back against the cinder block wall. And when the door opened, she turned her head and saw him standing there in the dark, and she did not speak. She did not gasp. She did not cry. She looked at him with an expression that held no surprise at all. I knew you'd come. Get them up, quietly. She moved down the aisle, touching shoulders, whispering. One by one, the shapes on the cots shifted, rose, stood. 7 young people, in the dark, blinking, confused, afraid. One of them started to speak. Sarah put her hand on his arm. Don't talk. Follow him. They followed. Colton led them to the door and out into the night air. 7 people in a line, barefoot or in unlaced boots, shivering in the September cold. Some of them were thin in ways that made his jaw tighten. He could see collarbones and wrist bones and the hollowed cheeks of young people who had not been eating enough for a long time. One girl wrapped her arms around herself and could not stop shaking. A young man with glasses held a blanket around his shoulders and looked at the sky as if he had forgotten what it looked like without a roof between him and the stars. The boy named Marcus was last out of the barracks. He moved with a limp so severe he could barely walk, dragging his left leg through the dirt, his face set in the rigid mask of someone who had learned to move through pain by refusing to acknowledge its existence. Colton recognized that mask. He wore versions of it himself. Marcus looked at Colton. His eyes were flat. Not grateful, not afraid. Empty in a way that was worse than either, because it meant that whatever had been done to him since June had reached the place where hope lives and had closed the door. Colton put his hand on the young man's shoulder, brief, firm, a touch that did not ask permission or offer comfort, one that said, "I see you, and we are leaving now." Marcus flinched. Then he nodded once and kept moving. He pointed them north, toward the gap in the fence, toward the canyon wall, toward a world that existed beyond the floodlight and the wire and the padlock on the gate. Move to the fence. Northwest corner. There's a hole. Go through. Climb the slope. Wait on the ridge. They moved. Sarah shepherded them. She had already been their leader inside the compound, Colton realized. She had organized herself, and she had organized them. She had done it without rank, without training, without authority. She had done it because someone had to. The first 4 reached the fence gap without incident. They went through one at a time. Sarah held the mesh for each one. She was the last to go. Then the porch light came on. Boyd Phelps came through the main building door with the rifle in his hands, and the older associate behind him. The floodlight was already on, but the porch light added a second source, and the compound went from shadows to stage lighting in a half-second. Boyd saw the open barracks door first, then the empty cots through the window. Then he turned and saw Colton standing in the yard, 30 feet from the barracks, in the open. "Who the hell are you?" Colton did not answer. He was counting. Seconds. Distance. The associate was behind Boyd, reaching for something at his belt. Boyd had the rifle up, but not aimed. Not yet. He was still processing. A man in his compound, at 3 in the morning, with his barracks empty. "You're trespassing on a licensed facility. I will shoot you. Your license is forged. Your custody papers are forged. Your county seal is photocopied. And in about 90 minutes, the New Mexico State Police is going to come down that road with a federal team and a warrant." Boyd's face changed. Not fear. Calculation. The same kind of cold arithmetic that Colton had seen in men who ran operations and understood that variables had shifted beyond their ability to control. "You're the PJ. I'm the PJ." The associate moved, right hand clearing a holster at his hip. Colton saw it and gave the signal he had not given yet. 2 sharp clicks of his tongue. A sound that carried no farther than 20 feet. And that meant, in the vocabulary Danny Lusk had built between a man and a dog, one word. Go. Echo came out of the shadow beside the workshop like something the darkness had been holding in reserve. 82 pounds at full speed, low, silent until the last 3 yards when a sound came out of him that was not a bark and not a growl, but something between. A sound that said, "I have been waiting." He hit the associate below the waist, not teeth, shoulder and chest. The man went sideways into the porch rail. His hand came off the holster. He grabbed the rail. Echo circled and came again, driving him back, keeping him off balance, keeping his hands busy with staying upright instead of reaching for the weapon. Boyd swung the rifle toward the dog. "No." Colton covered the 30 feet in a run that came from the same place every sprint in the pipeline had come from. Not speed, decision. The body going where the mind had already arrived. He hit Boyd at the shoulder. The rifle came up between them, and Colton got both hands on the barrel. Boyd was strong. Not trained strong, ranch strong. The kind of strength built from 20 years of fence posts and hay bales and the hard labor of a man who had turned that labor into a weapon long before he picked up the actual weapon. He wrenched the rifle back. Colton held. The stock caught his bad shoulder, and something flared white hot through the joint. He felt the old tear in the labrum shift. Pain like a wire pulled through the socket. His hands did not let go. They turned together in the harsh light. 2 men and a rifle, and the generator humming behind them. And somewhere beyond the fence, 8 young people were climbing a canyon wall toward a freedom that depended on what happened in the next 10 seconds. Colton torqued the barrel sideways. He used his body weight, not his arms. Leverage. The technique was SERE, disarm. Practiced 10,000 times in controlled environments, where the rifle was rubber and the stakes were a grade on a form. Here, the rifle was steel, and the stakes were a girl with a splinted ankle who had written a note that said, "Don't wait for warrants." The rifle stripped free. It hit the porch boards, and Colton kicked it behind him into the dark. Boyd came at him with his fists. First punch, hard, straight, landed square on Colton's sternum. Air went out. Second punch, right cross. Colton blocked with his forearm and felt the bone ring. Third punch. Colton caught the wrist, stepped offline, rotated his hip, and threw Boyd over it. The man landed flat on his back on the wooden planks. The sound was loud in the quiet compound. The air went out of Boyd's lungs in a grunt that echoed off the cinder block walls of the barracks. Colton dropped a knee into his back and pulled the zip ties from his pocket. "Stay down." Boyd struggled. Colton leaned his weight into the knee. The shoulder screamed. He ignored it. "Stay down." The zip ties went on. Wrists behind the back. Tight. Echo had the associate pinned against the fence, not biting, standing over him. The man had stopped moving. He lay on his side with his hands visible and his eyes on the dog's muzzle, which was 3 inches from his face. "Echo, hold." The dog held. Every muscle still, eyes fixed. Colton walked to the associate and zip-tied his wrists, then his ankles. The man did not resist. Whatever fight he had owned 5 minutes ago was gone. Echo had removed it. He checked Echo, ran his hand along the dog's left side where the afternoon kick had landed. The dog was panting, favoring the ribs slightly, but standing, steady. His eyes were bright and his ears were up, and the adrenaline had him running higher than the pain. Good boy, good boy. Echo pressed his head into Colton's thigh. Once. Brief. Then he stepped back and resumed position over the associate. The third associate was not in the compound. Supply run, Sarah had said. Comes once a week. Today was not the day. One variable accounted for. Colton walked to the fence gap. Sarah was on the other side, standing with the 7 young people on the canyon slope. Some of them were sitting on the ground. Marcus was leaning against a rock, his bad leg extended. Sarah had her arm around a girl who was shaking. "It's clear. Stay on the ridge. Help is coming." "When?" He checked his watch. 03:55. 5 minutes. Soon, he went back into the compound, picked up the rifle, cleared the chamber, set it on the main building porch, out of reach of both restrained men, walked the perimeter, checked every building. The workshop was empty. A storage room in the main building held tools, fuel cans, and a filing cabinet. He opened the cabinet. Folders, custody forms, correspondence. Boyd's emails to parents, printed copies. Progress reports for young people who were not progressing, written by a man who had never provided them a single hour of therapy. He left the cabinet open. The state police could photograph it. Chain of custody mattered. He had learned that at the ops desk, too. At 04:03, headlights appeared at the far end of the canyon road. 2 vehicles, then a third, coming fast. He walked to the gate and unchained it, swung it open, stood to one side with his hands visible, because when a tactical team arrives at an unsecured compound at 4 in the morning, the first thing they assess is who in the yard is a threat. The lead vehicle stopped. Doors opened. Officers in tactical gear. State police. Behind them, 2 unmarked SUVs. Federal plates. A woman got out of the second vehicle. Mid-40s. Short, dark hair. The bearing of someone who had been in charge of difficult situations long enough that authority no longer required announcement. "Lieutenant Garza?" "Draper?" "Compound is secured. 2 individuals restrained on the porch. 3rd associate is not on site. 7 civilians and 1 witness are on the ridge above the north fence." Filing cabinet in the main building contains documentation. She looked at him. She looked at the compound. She looked at Echo, who stood beside Colton with his ears up and his body still humming with the last of the night's adrenaline. "You did all this with a dog and a pair of zip ties." And a pair of fencing pliers. She did not smile, but something moved behind her eyes that might have been its distant relative. "Show me the cabinet." He showed her. The sun came up over the canyon at 6:12. It came the way the sun comes in New Mexico in September, without preamble, without apology. One moment the canyon was gray and blue, and the next it was gold and red, and the shadows retreated to the places where they always hid during the day and would return to when the light was finished. The compound looked different in daylight. Smaller. Uglier. The barracks was a cinder block box with stains on the walls and cots that sagged in the middle. The main building needed paint, and the porch boards were rotted at the south end. The workshop smelled like diesel and dust. It was not a fortress. It was not even an impressive prison. It was just a collection of buildings in a canyon that nobody visited, held together by fraud and fear and the vast indifference of the landscape surrounding it. The state police had Boyd in the back of a cruiser. The older associate was in a second vehicle. The 3rd associate would be picked up by noon, Garza said. It was a matter of running the plate and making a phone call. The 7 young people sat on the canyon slope wrapped in shock blankets provided by the federal team. 2 paramedics moved among them, checking vitals, offering water, speaking quietly. Marcus sat apart, with his bad leg extended and a paramedic wrapping it in a proper splint. He had not spoken since leaving the barracks. Colton recognized that silence. He had carried versions of it himself for years. Sarah was with an FBI agent, giving a statement. She sat on a folding chair someone had produced from one of the SUVs, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. Her voice carried across the morning air, calm, ordered. She told it the same way she had told it to Colton in the trailer. Facts, in sequence. No emotion added. The kind of testimony that would hold in a courtroom because it did not need decoration to carry weight. Colton sat on the tailgate of his truck, parked outside the compound gate. The morning sun was warm on his face and his hands and the metal of the tailgate, and the warmth felt earned in a way that ordinary warmth did not. Echo lay beside him on the truck bed, chin on his paws, breathing steadily. The vet from Corvo had arrived an hour earlier. Dr. Reeves. A quiet woman in her 60s, with calloused hands and the efficient compassion of someone who had spent her career treating animals and knew better than to waste their time with unnecessary talk. She checked Echo's ribs with firm, practiced fingers, pressing along each intercostal space while the dog held still and watched her face. She confirmed the bruising from the afternoon kick, found a graze along his right shoulder where the fence wire had caught him going through the gap. The wound was shallow but long, running 4 inches through the fur, the skin pink and raw beneath. She cleaned it with saline, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped a light bandage around his chest, securing it with medical tape that she placed with the care of someone who understood that a dog's dignity was as real as a person's. He'll be stiff for a week, maybe 2. Keep the bandage clean and dry. Change it every other day. No running. Echo looked at her with his 1 ear up, 1 ear down expression of mild skepticism, as if the concept of no running was a suggestion he would take under advisement and almost certainly reject. He's a good dog. Colton put his hand on Echo's back. Warm fur, the rise and fall of breath, the steady heartbeat of an animal that had been kicked and grazed and run 12 miles through a canyon in the dark, and was now resting on a truck tailgate in the morning sun, as if the whole night had been an extended exercise he was pleased to have completed. Yeah, he is. Ray Valdez showed up at 0730. He drove his old county truck up the canyon road and parked behind the state police vehicles and got out with 2 thermoses of coffee and the expression of a man who had been right about something he wished he had been wrong about. He found Colton on the tailgate, sat beside him without asking, opened a thermos and poured. Hell of a night. Yeah, you should have called me sooner. I know. You going to make that a habit? Doing everything alone until the alone part almost gets somebody killed? Colton looked at his hands. They were scraped from the fence wire and the fight on the porch and the 12-mile walk through canyon terrain in the dark. His shoulder ached in a deep, grinding way that meant he had aggravated the old injury and would be paying for it for weeks. Working on it. Ray poured him coffee. They sat on the tailgate and drank it, and watched the federal team process the compound. That girl, Sarah, she's something. She is. She gave a 2-hour statement without stopping,
The FBI agent told me he's been doing this for 12 years and never had a witness that organized. She built her own case file inside that compound. Before I ever found her, she was already preparing to testify.
Ray looked at him sideways. Sounds like she didn't need rescuing. Sounds like she needed a ride. Colton almost smiled. It did not quite arrive, but the shape of it was closer than it had been in a long time. Below them, the paramedics were loading Marcus into a vehicle. The young man had not spoken a word. He moved where they guided him and sat where they placed him, and his eyes were open, but looking at something a long distance behind them. Colton knew that distance. He had spent 3 years living at that distance.
The place where the world was still visible, but could no longer reach you because you had retreated behind something that felt safer than engagement. He watched Marcus disappear into the vehicle and thought about Danny. Not the dying, the before. Danny sitting in the team room at Bagram, telling a story about his mother's crawfish boil that had everyone laughing so hard the coffee went cold. Danny, who never met a silence he couldn't improve. Danny, who believed that people were meant to reach each other, and that the reaching was the whole point of being alive. Colton had never agreed with that philosophy. He had respected it. He had envied it. He had watched it die on a hillside and spent 3 years alone on a mesa because the absence of it was easier to carry in empty rooms. But Danny had left him Echo, and Echo had found a girl in an arroyo, and the girl had led him to a canyon where 7 people sat behind a fence waiting for someone to do the thing that Danny's motto had always demanded. That others may live. Not just the ones in uniform, not just the ones on the other end of a radio call. All of them. The ones behind the fences nobody checked. Ray finished his coffee, set the cup on the tailgate. You should come down to town more. The SAR team could use you on the regular roster instead of the volunteer list. I'll think about it. That's what you said last year. This time, I might mean it. Ray looked at him, looked at Echo, looked at the compound below, where the federal team was photographing the barracks and the filing cabinet and the fence that had held 7 lives inside it, until a dog brought a piece of bloody cloth to a man on a mesa trail. Yeah, I think you might. He climbed off the tailgate and walked to his truck, paused at the door. Danny would have been proud of you. He drove away before Colton could answer, which was probably the point. 3 days later, the canyon was quiet again. Federal tape sealed the compound gate. The buildings sat empty. The generator was off. Without its hum, the canyon had returned to the sounds it had always held. Wind, birds, the dry rattle of brush in the afternoon heat. The land did not remember what had happened in it. The land never did. Colton was at the trailer. He had spent the morning cleaning gear, washing the rope, sharpening the knife, checking the SAR radio. The small tasks that filled a day and gave his hands something to do when his mind wanted to replay the night in the compound on a loop. Echo lay in a patch of sun beside the trailer step, bandage still on, moving carefully. He had limped for the first 2 days and now walked with a slight hitch that the vet said would resolve. He slept more than usual. He ate well. He watched Colton the way he always watched him, with the steady attention of an animal that had decided long ago to keep count.
The SAR radio crackled at noon. A hiker had twisted a knee on the Pecos Trail. Colton took the call, relayed coordinates to the county team, and logged it. Routine. The kind of work that did not require heroism, or night navigation, or cutting through fences. The kind of work that kept the system running for the people who fell into ordinary trouble on ordinary days. He had heard from Garza once since the compound, a brief call. Boyd and both associates had been charged. Federal prosecutors were building the case. The parents were being contacted. Marcus had been hospitalized for malnutrition and an untreated fracture. 3 of the 7 had already gone home. The others were in temporary housing arranged by social services. Sarah's name had not come up in the call. Colton had not asked. Some things resolved themselves without being chased. At 1400, a car came up the Mesa Road. Colton heard it before he saw it. A sedan, not a truck. It climbed the grade slowly, tires crunching on the packed dirt. Echo lifted his head from the sunny spot and watched it approach. His tail moved once. The car stopped 30 yards from the trailer. A woman got out of the driver's side. Mid-50s, graying brown hair pulled back. She wore a blue blouse and cotton pants and shoes that belonged to a suburb, not a mesa. She looked at the trailer, the landscape, the open sky, with the bewildered expression of someone who had driven 5 hours to a place she could not quite believe existed. The passenger door opened. Sarah got out. She looked different. 3 days of proper food, proper sleep, a proper shower. Her hair was clean and pulled back. She wore clothes that fit. The splint was gone, replaced by a medical boot on her left ankle. She moved carefully, but without the desperate economy of someone running on empty. She looked at the trailer, at the mesa, at Echo, who had risen from his patch of sun and was standing at the top of the step, watching her with his ears forward and his posture low and steady. The woman stayed by the car. Sarah walked. She walked across the 30 yards of hard-packed dirt and dry grass to where Colton stood beside the trailer door with a rag in one hand and a wrench in the other, because he had been tightening the propane fitting when the car arrived and had not put down his tools. She stopped in front of him. She did not hug him. She did not make a speech. She stood there with her hands at her sides and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the September wind moved across the mesa between them. "This is my aunt. She's taking me to Albuquerque. I'm going to stay with her for a while." "Good." "The FBI wants me to testify when it goes to trial." "You'll be good at that." "I know. I've been practicing in my head since June." She looked past him at the trailer. The door was open. She could see the counter, the radio, the cot where she had slept, the nail on the wall where the beret hung. "I wrote something before I went outside that day. On the notepad. I read it. I meant it. Don't wait for warrants. Don't wait for the system. Don't wait for someone to tell you it's okay to help. You could have been killed going out there. You went out there 3 times. I had training. I had you." He did not know what to say to that. The statement was too large and too simple and too true for any response he could assemble from the limited vocabulary of a man who had spent 3 years practicing the art of saying as little as possible. She seemed to understand that. She nodded once, as if his silence were its own kind of answer, and turned to look at Echo.
She looked at the rag in his hand, the wrench, the radio on the counter inside the open door, the life he had built up here, spare and functional and organized around the principle that if you kept your hands busy and the radio on, the silence could not become the kind of silence that swallowed people. "Are you going to be okay?" "I've been okay." "That's not what I asked." He set the wrench down on the step. He did not know how to answer the question. He had never known how to answer questions like that. Danny had been the one who talked. Danny had been the one who filled silences with warmth and stories and the easy laughter of someone who believed that connection was not a vulnerability, but a strength. Colton had never learned that. He had learned to go in and get people out, and that was the skill he had. And it was not the same as the skill she was asking about. "I'm working on it." Sarah looked at Echo. The dog had come down from the step. He stood beside Colton, his bandaged shoulder visible, his one ear up and one ear folded, his amber eyes on the girl who had slept on the cot for 3 nights while he guarded the door. She knelt. Slowly, careful of the medical boot, she put her hand on his head. Echo leaned into the touch, his eyes half closed. His tail swept once across the dirt. She scratched behind the folded ear, and the dog made a low sound in his chest that was not a whine and not a groan, but something closer to recognition. The sound of an animal acknowledging that something had ended and something else had held. She stayed there for a long moment. Then she stood. "Thank you." She did not wait for him to respond. She turned and walked back to the car. Her aunt watched her come. The woman's eyes moved from Sarah to Colton to the dog and back to her niece. And whatever she read in that sequence, she did not ask about it. Some stories explain themselves by the way people stand at the end of them. The aunt stood by the car, watching. She had not approached. She had not introduced herself. She stood with her keys in her hand and her eyes moving between her niece and the man and the dog, reading the scene with the careful attention of someone who had spent 3 days learning from phone calls and news reports that the world had treated her sister's daughter in ways that required a different kind of attention going forward. Sarah looked at the aunt, looked at Colton. The September light caught the mesa behind him in deep gold, and the trailer threw a long shadow across the dirt. "If they need me to testify, I'll come back." "You won't need to come back here. They'll bring you to Albuquerque, federal courthouse." "I know. I meant here. To visit." He did not know what to say to that either. The word visit implied a future that included return, and return implied a connection that survived departure. And connection was something he had spent 3 years learning to live without. Echo pressed his nose into Sarah's hand one final time. She let her fingers rest on his muzzle for a moment. Then she straightened. "Take care of him." The words hit Colton in the chest. Take care of Echo. The same words. Different voice. Different hillside. Same debt. "I will." Sarah got in the car. The door closed. The engine started. The sedan backed down the Mesa Road, turned, and drove north toward the highway. Colton watched it until the dust settled and the road was empty and the sound of the engine had dissolved into the wind. The mesa was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something has ended and before whatever comes next has announced itself. Echo sat beside him, one ear up, one ear down, bandaged shoulder, steady eyes. He looked up at Colton, and then looked at the road, and then looked back. And in the dog's gaze, there was nothing that needed translation. I'm here. You're here. What's next? Colton put his hand on the dog's back. Warm fur, the rise and fall of breath underneath, the heartbeat of something that had crossed a dead man's promise and a live man's guilt, and come out the other side, still willing to sit beside him on a September afternoon and wait. He picked up the wrench. He picked up the rag. He went back to the propane fitting. Inside the trailer, the SAR radio clicked twice and went quiet. Channel 7. Standby. The red light steady. The mesa held its breath. Then the wind came again, pushing south over the ridge, carrying dust and sage and the last of the summer heat out across the canyon and away. Echo lay down beside the step, chin on his paws, and closed his eyes. Colton tightened the fitting, tested it. Good. He went inside, sat down at the table, opened the radio log, picked up the pen. On the nail by the door, the maroon beret hung where it always hung. He did not look at it. He did not need to. The man who had earned it was already at his post. Where are you watching from today? If this story stayed with you, if you believe that the people who protect us sometimes need protecting too, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what part of the story moved you most. And if you believe that loyalty, courage, and second chances still matter in this world, write Amen in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, courage, love, and healing can reach those who need them. May God bless every person listening. May He bring strength to the weary, hope to the lost, and light to every dark road you are walking. And if you are carrying a burden today, may you find the courage to let someone help you carry it. You were never meant to walk alone.